Jake Bennett sat on an overturned fuel canister, staring at the empty repair bay that had once been his pride and joy. 3 weeks. 3 whole weeks without a single customer walking through those bay doors. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, but he kept sipping it anyway. What else was there to do? Outpost Kepler 7 was dying. Everyone knew it. The trade routes had shifted 6 months back, and now the big cargo ships just bypassed this sector entirely. One by one the other businesses had packed up and left. The cantina closed. The fuel depot shut down. Even Old Man Rivers, who'd run the supply store for 20 years, had finally given up last month. Jake was 42 years old and everything he'd built was crumbling around him. His coveralls were permanently stained with grease and oil. The wrinkles on his face had deepened from stress. Bills were piling up on his desk, red notices screaming for payment he didn't have. Some nights he wondered if he should just pack it in too. Head back to Earth, find some factory job, admit defeat. But this repair bay was all he had. His father had taught him everything about fixing ships right here in this very space. Walking away felt like betraying that memory. The proximity alarm jolted him from his thoughts. Jake nearly dropped his mug. A ship? Actually entering his bay? He stood up fast, his heart suddenly pounding. Maybe his luck was finally turning around. Then he saw it and his jaw dropped. The ship that limped through the atmospheric shield was like nothing he'd ever seen in 2 decades of repair work. It was sleek in silver, flowing with curves that seemed to defy physics. But it was also clearly damaged. Sparks shot from the rear thrusters. The hull plates were scorched black in places. The whole thing hissed and groaned like a wounded animal as it settled onto his landing pad. Jake approached carefully, his mechanic's instincts already analyzing the damage patterns. The bay door of the ship opened with a smooth whisper, and his breath caught in his throat. The woman who stepped out was definitely not human. Her skin had this faint blue glow to it, like moonlight on water. She was tall, elegant, with features that were almost human but not quite. Her eyes were larger, more expressive, and they seemed to hold depths of intelligence that made Jake feel suddenly very aware of his stained coveralls and messy hair. "I am Ilara," she said, and her voice was like music. Perfect English but with an accent he couldn't place. "My ship requires repair. I do not possess local currency, but I can offer trade goods in exchange for your services." Jake found his voice. "Yeah, sure. Let me take a look at what we're dealing with here." He grabbed his diagnostic scanner and walked around the ship, professional instincts taking over. The vessel was gorgeous, even damaged. The technology had to be centuries ahead of anything humans had built. Maybe even thousands of years ahead. But technology was technology and broken was broken. He crawled underneath the ship, scanning the systems. The readings were wild, completely off the charts. But then Jake noticed something. The quantum drive that powered the whole thing was reading perfectly fine. The problem was much simpler than that. "Your quantum drive is fine," he called out, sliding out from under the ship. "You've got a coolant leak in the secondary systems. It's causing cascade failures throughout the ship. Your diagnostics are looking at the symptoms instead of the actual problem." Ilara moved closer, watching as he popped open an access panel. "You determined this so quickly?" "Been fixing ships my whole life," Jake said, reaching for his toolkit. The tools were old, some of them older than he was. Basic wrenches, welders, bypass cables. Nothing fancy. But they got the job done. He worked methodically, bypassing damaged systems and rerouting power flows. Ilara watched him with intense curiosity, like a scientist observing a fascinating specimen. It should have made him nervous, but Jake was too focused on the work. "This coolant line here is cracked," he explained, showing her the damaged component. "See how the fluid's leaking? That's dropping your temperature regulation. Once that goes, everything starts overheating. Then your safety systems kick in and start shutting things down to prevent damage. Your ship thinks it's protecting itself. And you can repair this?" Ilara asked. "Sure. I'll need to fabricate a replacement line, but I've got the materials. Give me a few hours." He worked steadily, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of repair work. This was what he was good at. This was where he belonged. Ilara asked questions constantly, seeming amazed by his simple, direct approach to problem solving. "You do not follow standard protocols," she observed at one point. Jake paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Protocols don't keep you alive out here on the frontier. Results do. I've seen plenty of by-the-book engineers who couldn't fix a broken door latch because it wasn't in their manual. Meh. I fix what's broken however I need to fix it." As night fell over the outpost, Jake continued working under the harsh lights of his repair bay. He barely noticed when Ilara stepped away, speaking quietly into some kind of communication device. The language was alien, musical and strange. But he did catch one phrase repeated several times. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Urgent. Almost excited. Later he'd wonder about that conversation. Later he'd realize how much that moment changed everything. But right now Jake Bennett just kept working, doing what he did best. Fixing what was broken. The repair that should have taken a week stretched into 3 days, and Jake found he didn't mind at all. For the first time in months, his repair bay felt alive again. More than that, he had company. Real company, not just the echoing silence that had become his constant companion. Elara didn't leave. She said she needed to stay with her ship to monitor the repairs, but Jake suspected it was more than that. The station had a small guest quarters that still had power, and she took a room there. Every morning she'd show up at the bay with questions. Endless questions. Why do you choose this tool over that one? She'd ask, watching him work. How did you know to bypass that system instead of replacing it? What made you think to use that approach? Jake tried to answer as best he could, though half the time he didn't really know himself. It was instinct, built from years of experience and necessity. Humans work with less, he explained one afternoon, holding up a piece of scrap metal he was reshaping. We don't have fancy equipment or unlimited resources. We learn to improvise. Out here on the frontier you make do or you die. Simple as that. He heated the metal with his ancient welding torch, bending it carefully to match the specifications he needed. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. That was what mattered. Elara watched with fascination. My people would design a new component from scratch. They would run simulations, test materials, follow exact protocols. Yeah, well, by the time they finished designing it, I'd already be 3 systems down the road with a working fix, Jake said with a slight grin. Different approaches, I guess. As the days passed, Jake started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Elara claimed she was a trade representative, traveling between systems to negotiate deals. But her bearing was all wrong for that. She moved with this natural authority, like someone used to being obeyed without question. Her clothes, when you looked closely, were made from materials that probably cost more than his entire station. And that ship of hers? The components were so advanced, so rare, that Jake had never even seen materials like that in any catalog. But he didn't push. Everyone had secrets out here on the frontier. Besides, he enjoyed her company. The outpost had been lonely for so long that having someone to talk to felt like a gift. On the second day, a critical power regulator burned out. Jake pulled it from the ship and immediately saw the problem. The component was fried beyond repair. I need to check my inventory, he said, heading to his storage room. 10 minutes of searching confirmed what he'd feared. I don't have a replacement for this, he called out. This tech is way beyond anything I stock. Honestly, I've never even seen a power regulator built like this. Then the ship cannot be repaired, Elara said, her face falling. I didn't say that. Jake turned the component over in his hands, thinking. His mind was already working through possibilities, angles, solutions. Give me a few hours. What he did next was something he'd learned from desperation and necessity. He took apart 3 old human power regulators from his spare parts bin, components from ships that had been decommissioned years ago. Outdated technology but functional. Then he carefully extracted working elements from Elara's burned-out regulator, the pieces that hadn't been damaged. He combined them. It was insane, really. The human components operated on completely different principles than the alien technology. The power frequencies didn't match. The energy flow patterns were incompatible. By every rule of engineering he'd ever learned, this shouldn't work. But Jake didn't care about rules. He cared about results. He spent 6 hours carefully integrating the systems, creating bridges between the incompatible technologies, forcing them to work together through sheer mechanical ingenuity. He used resistors to balance the power flow. He added capacitors to smooth out the frequency differences. He jerry-rigged connections that would make any proper engineer have a heart attack. When he finally installed it in the ship and powered it up, the hybrid component hummed to life perfectly. Elara stood there, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide. She pulled out some kind of scanning device and ran it over his creation. The device's screen lit up with readings that meant nothing to Jake but clearly meant everything to her. This violates 12 fundamental principles of quantum mechanics, she whispered, her voice filled with something between awe and disbelief. This should not function. The energy signatures are incompatible. The power frequencies are wrong. By every law of physics I understand, this should have exploded the moment you activated it. Jake wiped his greasy hands on a rag, shrugging. Yeah, well, sometimes the universe doesn't read the textbook. It works, doesn't it? It works perfectly, Ilara said softly, still staring at the component. Better than the original, actually. The efficiency is higher. How did you? Experience, Jake said simply. And desperation. Those are the two best teachers you'll ever find. On the third day, Jake sealed the final access panel. The ship was ready. Every system checked out green. Ilara ran her own diagnostics, and even she had to admit the repairs were flawless. You've done excellent work, she said. More than excellent. Remarkable. Jake felt a flush of pride. Coming from someone with her obvious knowledge of advanced technology, that meant something. Then the proximity alarms started screaming. 3 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding the tiny outpost. They were enormous, dwarfing Ilara's sleek vessel like whales next to a minnow. Their weapon systems were clearly active, energy signatures lighting up Jake's scanners like Christmas trees. His heart hammered in his chest. Pirates? Military? Some kind of alien invasion? But Ilara's expression had changed completely. The friendly curiosity vanished, replaced by something commanding, powerful, almost regal. They're here for me, she said calmly, her voice carrying an authority that made Jake take an involuntary step back. She turned to face him fully, and in that moment she seemed like a completely different person. Jake, I need to tell you the truth about who I am. The armored guards moved with military precision, filling every corner of Jake's repair bay within seconds. Their armor was black and silver, matching the warships outside, and each one carried weapons that made Jake's old pulse rifle look like a kid's toy. He counted at least 20 of them, maybe more, all standing at perfect attention. Jake's hands went up instinctively. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was it. He'd helped the wrong person and now he was going to pay for it. Maybe she was a criminal. Maybe those ships were here to arrest her. And him along with her. But Ilara didn't look worried. She didn't look scared at all. She stood straighter, her shoulders pulling back. Her chin lifted. That friendly, curious expression she'd worn for 3 days vanished completely, replaced by something else. Something powerful. When she spoke, her voice rang out with absolute command, the kind of voice that expected obedience and always got it. I am Empress Ilara Vast Terrain, she announced to the assembled guards. Ruler of 300 billion souls across the Valerian Empire, sovereign of 47 star systems, keeper of the ancient throne. Jake's brain stuttered to a halt. Empress? Did she just say Empress? He looked at her, then at the guards who were all bowing deeply, then back at her. You're, what? Ilara turned to him, and for the first time he saw something like apology in those alien eyes. I was traveling incognito when my ship malfunctioned. It wasn't an accident that I chose your station, Jake. I've been searching. Searching for what? His voice came out rough, confused. For someone like you. She waved a hand and the guards relaxed slightly, though they remained watchful. I needed to see how I'd be treated without my title. Without the weight of my position affecting every interaction. But more importantly, I needed to find someone who could think differently than my people do. Jake's legs felt weak. He sat down heavily on his workbench, not caring any more about protocol or propriety. An empress. He'd been casually chatting with an empress for 3 days. Making jokes. Showing her his messy storage room. Complaining about his bills. Why, he managed to ask. Why come to a nowhere station in the middle of empty space? Why talk to a nobody mechanic? Ilara moved closer, carefully, like she was approaching a spooked animal. Because my empire is dying, Jake. Not in the way your station is dying, not economically. We're dying from the inside. We've become too comfortable, too rigid. She gestured around at the repair bay, at his old tools, at the hybrid component he'd created. My empire is advanced beyond anything humanity has achieved. We've had interstellar travel for 15,000 years. We've conquered diseases, extended our lifespans, built wonders that would seem like magic to most species. But we've lost something crucial along the way. What's that? Jake asked. Innovation. Creativity. The ability to think outside established patterns. Her voice carried frustration now, passion. Our engineers follow protocols that are 10,000 years old. They run simulations for months before attempting repairs. They wait for committees to approve every decision. I watched you solve problems in days that my best scientists couldn't solve in months. You created a hybrid component that shouldn't exist, using materials and methods that no Valerian would ever consider. Jake shook his head. I'm just a mechanic. I fix things. That's all. That's everything, Ilara said intensely. That's exactly what we've forgotten how to do. We've become so focused on theory, on perfection, on following the established way, that we've lost the ability to adapt, to improvise, to make things work with what we have instead of what we wish we had. She took a breath, and Jake saw something else in her expression now. Fear. Real, genuine fear. I'm offering you a position as Chief Innovation Advisor to the Imperial Fleet. I'm offering to change humanity's place in the galaxy. I'm offering you wealth beyond imagination, access to technology your species hasn't dreamed of yet, a chance to make humanity a true partner with the Valerian Empire instead of a minor species on the outskirts. It was too much. Way too much. Jake stood up, needing to move, to think. Why would you need all that? What's really going on here? Ilara's expression turned grave, and Jake saw the weight of her position settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. My empire faces a threat we cannot solve with conventional methods. An ancient race, older than any civilization in the known galaxy, has awakened. They call themselves the Architects. And? Jake prompted when she paused. They've given us a test. A challenge. They've presented us with a puzzle that my best minds, my most advanced scientists, my most brilliant engineers have been unable to solve for 3 months. Her voice dropped. If we fail, they will destroy our core worlds as a demonstration of their power. 47 star systems. 300 billion lives. All gone. The weight of those words hung in the air like a physical thing. Jake felt them pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. How long? He asked quietly. 2 weeks. 14 standard days. Ilara looked directly at him, and he saw the desperation there. I've spent the last month traveling in secret, visiting remote stations, observing different species, looking for someone who thinks differently than my people do. Then my ship actually malfunctioned and I met you. I watched you work. I saw how you approached problems. She stepped closer. I need human ingenuity, Jake. I need your way of thinking. I need someone who doesn't know what's impossible so they don't realize when they're doing it. Jake stared at the Empress, then at his shabby repair bay with its old tools and stained floors. He thought about 3 weeks without customers, about bills he couldn't pay, about a dying station and a dying business. He thought about 300 billion people facing death because of some ancient test. He wiped his hands on his coveralls, buying time to think. Finally, he looked up at her. Tell me about this test. The Imperial flagship was beyond anything Jake had ever imagined. The ship was massive, easily the size of a small city back on Earth. As he walked through its corridors with Ilara and her guards, he felt like a kid who'd stumbled into a science fiction movie. The walls gleamed with some kind of metal that seemed to glow from within. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing star charts and data streams he couldn't begin to understand. They brought him to a command center that overlooked the vastness of space. Through the massive viewing window, Jake could see his tiny station far below, looking like a forgotten toy. For a moment he felt a pang of something. Not quite regret but sadness. That station had been his whole world for so long. Here, Ilara said, waving her hand over a console. The air in front of them suddenly filled with holographic images. This is what we're facing. Jake saw a structure floating in the darkness of space. At first he thought it might be a planet, but as the image zoomed closer he realized it was something else entirely. A ship. But calling it a ship felt wrong. It was more like a small moon made of metal and strange geometric patterns that hurt his eyes to look at too long. The Architects awakened 6 months ago, Ilara explained, her voice heavy. They came from the galactic core, from regions of space we've never explored. Their technology makes my empire look like children playing with wooden blocks. She manipulated the hologram, showing different angles of the structure. They didn't attack. They didn't negotiate. They simply issued an ultimatum to every major civilization in the galaxy. Prove your worth through challenges or be eliminated from existence. Jake felt his mouth go dry. Eliminated. They demonstrated their power on an uninhabited system, Ilara said quietly. They erased 3 planets. Not destroyed. Erased. The planets simply stopped existing as if they'd never been there at all. No debris. No radiation. Just empty space where worlds used to be. She pulled up another image, this one showing a derelict ship floating in space. It was smaller than the moon-sized structure, but still enormous. The design was alien in a way that made Jake's brain struggle to process it. Angles that shouldn't connect did. Surfaces that looked flat also looked curved. It was wrong and right at the same time. This is the first challenge, Ilara said. We must repair and operate this architect vessel using only the materials they've provided in the surrounding area. No outside help. No additional resources. Just what's there. And your people can't figure it out? Jake asked. Ilara's expression darkened. My best scientists have been working on it for 3 months. They've run millions of simulations. They've tried every approach in our databases. They've consulted with experts from 12 different species. Nothing works. They can't even get inside the ship, Jake. They can't open the access hatches. She zoomed in on a section of the hull. Jake saw Valerian engineers in suits, tiny figures against the massive structure, trying different tools and techniques. Nothing made any difference. How long do we have? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. 2 weeks, Alara said. 14 standard days. If we fail, the architects will destroy our 5 core worlds. 5 billion people will die instantly. The rest of the empire will collapse within a year. Jake felt the weight of that number pressing down on him. 5 billion people. He couldn't even really imagine that many people. His station had housed maybe 200 at its peak. He studied the holographic images, his mechanics instincts kicking in despite the impossibility of it all. Why me? I mean, really, why me? I'm nobody. Just a guy who fixes ships on a dying station. You've got scientists, engineers, people with actual education and credentials. What can I possibly do that they can't? Alara turned to face him fully. That's exactly why I need you, Jake. You don't think like them. My people have 10,000 years more technological development than humanity. We've solved problems your species won't face for centuries. But we've lost something along the way. She gestured at the images. My engineers see this challenge and immediately start running theoretical models. They calculate probabilities. They reference historical databases. They follow protocols. They think with their minds. And? Jake prompted. You think with your hands? Alara said intensely. You see a problem and you start trying things. You fail, you adjust, you try again. You don't care about theory or protocols. You care about results. You've shown innovation that my people forgot millennia ago. You see practical solutions instead of theoretical perfections. Jake looked around the pristine command center, then thought about his repair bay. Messy, chaotic, but it worked. He thought about the hybrid component he'd created, the thing that shouldn't work but did. He thought about 47 star systems, about billions of people he'd never meet but who'd die if he walked away. His whole life he'd been just a mechanic. Nothing special. Nobody important. Just a guy who fixed things. Maybe that was enough. Can I bring my tools? He asked. Alara smiled, and for a moment she looked less like an empress and more like the curious traveler he'd spent 3 days with. I'm counting on it, Jake. Your tools, your methods, your way of thinking. That's what we need. Jake nodded slowly. All right. I'm in. As they made preparations for departure, Jake saw Alara step away to speak with a tall, imposing figure in military uniform. Her advisor, probably. The conversation was quiet, but Jake caught snippets. Your Majesty, with respect, you're betting everything on one human mechanic, the advisor said, his voice tight with concern. No formal education. No military training. No scientific credentials. Are you certain this is wise? Alara glanced back at Jake, who was already examining one of the ship's control panels with unconcealed curiosity, running his hands over the surface like he was trying to understand it through touch. More certain than I've been in years, Commander, she said quietly. Watch him. He's not trying to understand how it works. He's trying to figure out how to fix it if it breaks. That's the difference. The journey to the architect derelict took 2 days at maximum speed. Jake spent most of that time in his assigned quarters, which were bigger than his entire living space back at the station. He couldn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 5 billion people who were counting on him without even knowing it. When they finally arrived, Jake pressed his face against the viewing port and felt his stomach drop. The architect vessel hung in space like a nightmare made solid. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of Alara's flagship. But size wasn't what made Jake's brain hurt. It was the geometry. The ship had angles that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Jake could see. Surfaces that looked flat from one angle appeared curved from another. Just looking at it made his eyes water. We've had teams working on this for 3 months, Alara said beside him. They've made 0 progress. Jake could see them out there now, tiny figures in spacesuits floating around the hull. Valerian engineers with equipment that probably cost more than a small planet, trying everything they could think of. He watched one team attempt to cut through the hull with some kind of plasma torch. The beam just disappeared when it hit the surface like it was being absorbed into nothing. Take me out there, Jake said. They suited him up in Valerian armor that adjusted automatically to his body. The technology was incredible, but Jake barely noticed. His mind was already working on the problem. As they shuttled him over to the derelict, he grabbed his old toolkit. The Valerian engineers had looked at it with poorly concealed amusement. Ancient human tools next to their advanced equipment. But Jake didn't care. These tools had never let him down. The moment his boots touched the architect ship's hull, Jake felt something. A vibration so faint he almost missed it. He knelt down, placing his gloved hand flat against the surface. There. Like a heartbeat, but slower. Much slower. He walked the perimeter, ignoring the Valerian scientists who were trying to explain what they'd already attempted. Jake had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to understand something was to stop thinking and start feeling. He ran his hands along the hull, searching for seams, for joints, for anything that felt different. The Valorians had tried everything technical. Brute force. Complex algorithms. Quantum resonance scanning. Energy pattern matching. They'd approached it like scientists, looking for the sophisticated solution. Jake approached it like a mechanic. "It's not broken," he announced after his first complete walk around the vessel. "It's locked." One of the Valerian scientists, a tall woman named Dr. Kellis, shook her head inside her helmet. "We've tried every unlocking protocol known to 17 civilizations." "Yeah, but every lock is made to be opened," Jake said. "Otherwise it's not a lock, it's just a wall." While the Valerian team went back to their simulations and calculations, Jake started experimenting. He tried pressure points. He tried thermal changes. He tried electrical currents. Most things did nothing. Some things seemed to generate a faint response in that heartbeat vibration, but nothing opened. He failed. Over and over again he failed. But each failure taught him something. The ship responded to physical contact more than energy. It reacted to patterns more than random attempts. It was almost like it was waiting for something specific. On the second day, exhausted and running out of ideas, Jake sat down on the hull to think. His hand absently tapped against the surface while his mind raced. Tap tap tap. Tap tap. That's when he noticed the vibration changing rhythm, like it was responding to his tapping. Jake's eyes widened. He stood up fast, almost floating away in the low gravity before his magnetic boots caught him. "It's not about power or codes," he said into the calm, "it's about rhythm. It's about communication." He thought back to his childhood, to school lessons about humanity's first attempts to contact alien life. They'd sent mathematical sequences into space, universal patterns that any intelligent species would recognize. Prime numbers. The Fibonacci sequence. Simple patterns that said, "We're here, we're intelligent, we want to talk." Jake started tapping on the hull. 112358. The Fibonacci sequence, each number represented by taps. The ship's vibration changed immediately, growing stronger, more responsive. He kept going, working through the sequence. Behind him, he heard the Valerian scientists yelling, their instruments going crazy with readings. Then, with a sound like a deep breath being released, the ship opened. Not dramatically. Not with explosions or light shows. A section of the hull simply became transparent, revealing an entrance that had been there all along, just invisible. Before anyone could move, the space around them changed. Jake felt a presence, vast and old, like standing next to an ancient mountain that had suddenly decided to notice you. The architects appeared. They weren't physical, not really. They were more like projections, forms of light and geometry that Jake's brain struggled to interpret. But their spokesman spoke in perfect English, which was somehow more unsettling than their appearance. "Most civilizations fail our tests," the voice said, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "They rely on their technology, their weapons, their certainty that advancement means superiority." The presence focused on Jake, and he felt like he was being looked at by something that saw not just him, but everything he was and had ever been. This human demonstrated what we were testing for. Adaptability. Creative problem solving. The ability to communicate beyond technological paradigms. The wisdom to see simplicity beneath complexity. The presence shifted to Alara. "Your civilization is spared. You have shown you still possess the capacity to grow." Then they were gone and the test was over. The trip back to Valerian space felt like a dream. Alara offered Jake anything he wanted. Wealth, power, a position in her empire. But Jake knew what he really wanted. "Rebuild my station," he said. "Make it a hub where species can exchange ideas, not just goods. A place where engineers and mechanics and thinkers from different worlds can learn from each other." "And?" Alara prompted, smiling. "And a formal partnership between your empire and humanity, based on mutual respect. Not you helping the primitive humans, but actual partnership." She agreed to both without hesitation. 6 months later, Jake stood in his rebuilt station, watching ships from a dozen species coming and going. Valerian engineers worked alongside human mechanics, learning what they called practical methodology. The station thrived in ways Jake had never imagined possible. Ilara visited regularly, and somewhere along the way, their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had expected but both welcomed. "You saved my empire," she said during one visit, watching him work on a ship with that same curiosity she'd shown months ago. Jake smiled, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. "I just fixed what was broken. That's what mechanics do." As her ship departed that evening, Jake looked out at the stars with new understanding. Humanity wasn't behind the other species. They weren't less advanced or less important. They were just different. And sometimes, different was exactly what the galaxy needed.